It's time. Time to rank every NFL head coach entering 2025. Welcome, football fans. In this video, my official NFL head coach rankings entering 2025. Ranking every coach from the worst to the best, including the new head coaches. If that sounds good, Gronk, spike the like button for more NFL rankings all off season long. I'm thinking about the running back position next. So if you want my running back rankings, 100 likes and I'll release them. Let me know in the comments where you believe your favorite team's head coach belongs on this list. And don't be a jabroni. Subscribe. Let's go. Let's kick off the list by saying this. For each coach, I have statistics, and those stats are dating back to 2021. I think one thing that we get wrong about evaluating head coaches is evaluating their entire history. I don't think that's fair that we include victories and playoff wins from 2008 when it's 2025. So I have used a 4-year sample size, assuming that that coach has actually coached that long. And I have given you those stats. If they've only coached 3 years, it's 3 years. If they've only coached 2 years, it's 2 years. You understand. So that's where those stats come from. And let's get to it, beginning with the bottom of the list, the new coaches. Now, I don't necessarily have rankings for these coaches because I don't think it's fair to rank new NFL head coaches above or below the guys that we've already seen coach. But I will discuss them and I'll give you my honest opinion of each coach. So let's begin with this, okay? Aaron Glenn of the New York Jets. If I were to evaluate each new head coach, this is the order I'd go in. Aaron Glenn would be my least favorite hire of the offseason. And I believe that because, first of all, I don't really love the rumored report of how he handled Aaron Rodgers. It's a small thing, but I wanted to throw it out there. Second, I was not a huge fan of Aaron Glenn in Detroit as a defensive coordinator, and that's very important. That's the evidence we have of him as a coach. He only really led a good defense one time in his entire career. Last year, they had a pretty good defense, but even then, it wasn't dominant. Like, not really even close. I think the biggest thing you can say about Aaron Glenn is he's a former player. He's a former player, in fact, of the Jets. Aaron Glenn has a good presence and command because of that respect that he gets from his players. And I think he did showcase in Detroit that he was able to overcome certain personnel going down, and he did find creative solutions for helping his defense. But in my opinion, Aaron Glenn was far too rigid in his defensive structure, far too predictable. Man-to-man coverage, blitz, continuously packing the box against the run. His style, his structure is evident, which sometimes can be good, but at the same time, it was too predictable. That's a problem because good play callers and good offensive minds are going to pick that apart. Eventually, they're going to find the recipe to destroy your defense, no matter how great the talent is. I do question Aaron Glenn in terms of his ability to actually be a head coach because honestly, he wasn't a great defensive coordinator. So that's why I have him as like my least favorite hire. It also doesn't help that he is a lot like the Todd Bulls hire, the Robert Saleh hire of the New York Jets in the past. Defensive coaches, and a lot like Todd Bulls, kind of on the quiet side, unlike Robert Saleh, I would say. But this team, this franchise just continuously is just They're chasing after Rex Ryan. That's what they're doing with this defensive-minded physicality mentality. So I don't think he'll last very long, but I could be wrong. Okay? That's my take on Aaron Glenn. Next, we have Brian Schottenheimer of the Dallas Cowboys. I could see Brian Schottenheimer working out. And I think it's because Schottenheimer is an offensive-minded guy who has taken a back seat in Dallas. He's not necessarily or hasn't necessarily been the play caller, but he has been a play caller for other teams, including Rex Ryan's Jets, funny enough, but also the Seattle Seahawks with Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, and he has plenty of experience under great head coaches. Not only that, but he is a son of a great head coach, Marty Schottenheimer. And I think he is well schooled in how to actually lead a team, lead a group of men. I think that he's being undersold for his actual accolades and his resume. So I actually think that Schottenheimer is an intriguing hire. He's not the whiz kid on the block. He's not this incredible play caller, but I could see him having that offensive touch and offensive influence, but from the overseer position of a head coach. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not sure he has a great presence, but he does seem to have a little bit of a good, fun vibe. So Brian Schottenheimer, not my favorite hire, but I'm intrigued by him. Next, we have Kell Moore, who is the former Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator previously with Philadelphia, winning a Super Bowl. And I think that did a lot for his accolades and for his confidence, honestly. And I think a lot of people were looking for Kell Moore to have that playoff success, have something on his resume like that Super Bowl performance against the Chiefs, where, let's be fair, the Eagles dominated. But a lot of that came down to Kell Moore just always being a step ahead of Spags, which is not something that often happens in a big moment or a big game. Okay? Spags has outcoached Kyle Shanahan. He's outcoached Josh McDaniels. He's outcoached some brilliant offensive mind. And I don't think Kell Moore is on the level of those guys that I just mentioned in terms of game-to-game, week-to-week offensive prowess. But what I have seen from Kell Moore is an ability to get a lot out of multiple different systems, multiple different teams, multiple different styles. He got a lot out of Dallas and Dak Prescott and that offense. Multiple years of ranking first in yards, okay? He also put up that great Philadelphia playoff run, had Saquon Barkley go on a historic run as one of the greatest running back seasons, if not the front-to-back greatest season we've ever seen. With Justin Herbert, it was a little bit more of a kind of the downside of his career, but he still kind of has experience with Jalen Hurts, has experience with Dak Prescott, experience with Justin Herbert, a lot of different quarterbacks and styles in there, and then also different head coaches that he's been underneath, understanding what they like, what they don't like, and what works and what doesn't work. Seeing guys like Mike McCarthy who have won Super Bowls. Seeing guys also like Nick Sirianni who just went on to win a Super Bowl. Seeing what goes wrong with a team like the Chargers. So I think Kell Moore has plenty of experience. What I don't love about Kell Moore is I don't think he has the personality to be a head coach. I think he is a better play caller and offensive coordinator. I think he's a little dorky. I think he's a little nerdy. And to me, that doesn't come across as a leader, a man in command, okay? I don't think he has the toughness or the grit that I'm looking for from that head coach that I think might be necessary. That being said, I am intrigued because he is a thinker, and I think that's a good thing. So, Kell Moore, we'll see how he does with the Saints. Liam Cohen, one of my favorite offensive minds of last season, is now Jacksonville's coach. And I am super fascinated to see Liam Cohen as a head coach. I thought he did a phenomenal job last year with the Bucs, and I would argue that he maybe should have been the offensive coordinator of the year or the assistant coach of the year. I thought he was really that great. I thought what he was able to do to elevate the Bucs running game. I know they did add a center in Graham Barton and a running back in Bucky Irving, but to be able to maximize those guys, to be able to get the most out of Rachaad White we've ever seen, the most out of Baker Mayfield, the best season of Baker Mayfield we've ever seen. And it's not like Baker Mayfield's had poor coordinators in his past. Kevin Stfansky, right? With the Browns, we saw Dave Canales a year previous. This guy has had good play callers, even Sean McVay for a brief period of time. But Liam Cohen, man, I love his play calling. I love his style. I love his balance. I love the screen game that he offers. I love the timing of his play calls. I think he's a very smart offensive mind. He is a little dorky in his own right. You know, the Duval, whatever he was doing there, that's a little weird, a little off. We got to work on that. But I do feel like if he rehearses his speeches a little bit better, he could be a guy. I mean, I think he has kind of an endearing dorkiness to him, and he's also just a very smart offensive guy, and that seems to be the trend right now. That puts you at the forefront of the NFL right now, and if he's able to prove that he can get the most out of Trevor Lawrence, that's going to go a long way in Jacksonville with those Duval fans, okay? I do wonder how he's going to do with the 3 phases. I do wonder how he's going to do in terms of game management. Those will be questions, especially if he's got his head in the play call sheet. But I do like him as a play caller, and that keeps him ahead of a lot of these other guys where I'm really intrigued to see what he offers for Jacksonville. And then last but certainly not least, the guy that I like the most out of this crop, of course, Mike Vrabel, Pete Carroll, these guys have already been head coaches. They're ranked on the list. Ben Johnson is new to being a head coach. He's my favorite candidate, and I think a guy that could be a top 10 NFL head coach because I think he's showcased the last 2 seasons to be the best offensive play caller in the NFL. I'm not just saying that as a coordinator. I think overall, like beyond Kyle Shanahan, that good, okay? So Ben Johnson, I think what he brings is a combination of flair and toughness. That's what I loved about his Lions offense is it had incredible balance and it was able to rely on the run game when it needed to. It was able to smash your face and it was also able to aerial slice you, dice you. Okay, so that is a great combination. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Sean Payton. I think there's some Sean Payton influence here. Ben Johnson does seem a little bit more buttoned up than maybe a guy like Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan in their style of the way that they approach being, a personality. Ben Johnson maybe needs to kind of grow in terms of his personality and his presence. But I would also say that he's got some time. He's a young guy. He's got that quarterback mind. And as long as he can get Caleb Williams pointed in the right direction, it already feels like he has a good control over the personnel and what his team needs to be and what his offense needs to look like for them to maximize it, which is an incredibly good start for him this offseason. And I think he's just going to be one step ahead of defensive coordinators continuously, which it felt like in every big game they played, he was accomplished. He went out there and he put out a game plan that was effective. I rarely saw a game from Ben Johnson with the Lions, whether it was the Niners in the NFC Championship, he was coaching circles around them, whether it was even that Commanders game where they lost. I mean, it was not the offense's fault. I mean, if the defense could make a stop, that would have helped. So Ben Johnson has been incredibly good at play calling and incredibly good at sequencing. And I think now we'll see if he can control an entire team. It's a different type of thing. Maybe he learned from Dan Campbell how to be a leader of men, how to get the most out of his team, how to get that emotional energy surging. But we'll find out in Chicago. So Ben Johnson was my favorite hire of the new coaches. Now let's get to the real list, guys. So this is the real list, meaning that we have 27 coaches to rank. These are all coaches that have at least coached one season in the NFL for their current team, okay? So at number 20, well, I guess Pete Carroll and Mike Vrabel, they've coached more than one season, but not for their current team. Keep that in mind. At number 27, it is Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris is my least favorite current head coach. I don't like anything about Raheem Morris when it comes to being a presence. I feel like he is very arrogant. I don't like Raheem Morris. I don't know. I can't really put a finger on it. He's obviously not the best in terms of game management. We've seen that in pretty big spots. But also, he's a very mediocre defensive mind. I think when he was with the Rams, a lot of that, what that came down to, honestly, was the team was ridiculously stacked. The roster on defense was ridiculous. And otherwise, when he didn't have Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Von Miller, Leonard Floyd, etc., they were kind of an okay defense. I think that's fair to say. I think, honestly, they have not missed a beat. Raheem Morris does not provide any sort of offensive value. We've seen him in Tampa Bay, where I thought he was completely lost as a young coach in the NFL. Completely lost. He does seem to have that raw energy, but he's almost like a lesser Robert Saleh, in my opinion. And now Saleh is a defensive coordinator. Like, I just don't see Raheem Morris as an actual head coach. I don't know one single thing he does well. If anyone can let me know, let me know. But to me, I don't think he's good in any phase that I'm looking for. I don't think he's above average. Okay? So that's why I have him at number 27. I just don't see it. I'm sorry. At number 26, Brian Callahan, who could easily be 27. The one thing I can say about Brian Callahan, the preference, he's offensive, not defensive. Second of all, I want to give him a little bit more time. At least with Raheem Morris, we've seen him in Tampa Bay and how much of a failure that was. We also saw him brief period with Atlanta like a couple years ago before he even got this job. But with Brian Callahan, he was so frustrated about the quarterback situation and Will Levis and his lack of understanding of what they were trying to do on offense that I can kind of cut him some slack. I also saw what Callahan was able to do with, Jake Browning in Cincinnati. I also saw what he's able to do throughout his career with guys like Matthew Stafford and Joe Burrow and their development. So I give him a little credit for his lineage. I'd also say that, his father's a really smart football coach. I think maybe he's learning on the job, but he's learning. I thought it was a premature hiring, and I felt like it was a really poor firing by Tennessee. I think the biggest fault of Brian Callahan is the fact that he came after Mike Vrabel. And I think the Titans didn't value what Mike Vrabel actually brought to that team, getting more out of less. They just saw a defensive guy with a big personality. We don't want to deal with him anymore. Let's get rid of him. While Callahan has a lesser personality, right, can work in collaboration with others, and that's great, but that's not always what you want, in my opinion. But I will say that Callahan, offensive-minded guy, we'll see what he can bring. I'm not a huge fan of his scheme. I think it's just okay, but I kind of want to see more because it felt like in Cincinnati with Zack Taylor, that was more Zack Taylor-based. That was more Joe Burrow type thing. So I'm still kind of learning about this guy to a certain degree. But, first year is not great. Right? First year is not a great sample size. He had the first pick in the draft. That's not exactly ideal. So at number 26, Brian Callahan. I'll also say the team had a lot of talent, and they loaded up the team with talent last offseason. They had way more talent than the team that Mike Vrabel had the year previous, and they still sucked. That's concerning. That's the biggest red flag of what Brian Callahan has shown so far. At number 25, Dave Canales. Canales, I like a couple things about him. I think that he has the look and the feel of a head coach, a young guy, a young head coach. I think he's got a really vibrant personality, and I think that definitely was fed on or feasted on by his players later in the year. I thought Canales' number one trait that he showcased, which puts him above these other two coaches, is the team responded to him when they were playing poorly. That's a really good sign if you're a head coach. How do you bounce back? How do you overcome your faults or the things that you've done wrong or your team has done wrong, right? And I felt like Canales was still able to get energy, passion, and motivation out of his players when they didn't really need to, So I think that's a really good sign moving forward. I also think Canales does have a clear kind of lineage of his scheme that I sort of understand, whether it be from Seattle or from the Sean McVay-like level tree there. I would also say that Canales has worked well with quarterbacks in multiple occasions of being a quarterback whisperer. And I think one of the also big things we saw from him was to get more out of Bryce Young as the year went on. He even decided to bench Bryce Young, and it actually worked. That's something that doesn't work that often. He decided to sit Bryce Young down, get him back in the lab, restore his confidence, and it worked. So Canales does have this quarterback whisperer trait. I think that's starting to become evident, and I think his energy is something that is real. So I think he could be on the rise. He's somebody to watch out for, but definitely a guy that does have that offensive background. I don't think he's ever going to blow us away as a play caller, but I think that his offensive background does make him a interesting up-and-coming head coach because he attacks his team with that sort of positivity that is infectious. So at number 25, Dave Canales. At number 24, Brian Daboll. Now, Daboll's really tough for me because I loved Brian Daboll in Buffalo. Brian Daboll is a Patriot guy at heart, was a coach there for many years, including the tight end room with Rob Gronkowski and the man that we shall not name. I would also say that Brian Daboll had a brilliant first year as a head coach in the NFL. He was the coach of the year. And I think he deserved that award between his ability to get more out of Daniel Jones than I think we'll ever see in his career, to also the ability to manage a pretty bad roster and take them to the playoffs. And then on top of that, just what he was able to do in certain situations. Like the one that springs to mind is that week 1 win where they literally go for it, I think, for like the last play of the game, it's 4th down, or it's rather a 2-point conversion, and they go for the win. That kind of set the tone for the entire season. And I think the first year in the first offseason, Daboll got some toughness, some grit, and some great energy out of that team. But ever since then, it's been inconsistent. It's been really tough to watch in New York. He hasn't really had the quarterback, which has been a difficult kind of evaluation. But at the same time, I feel like he just hasn't been able to steer the ship in the right direction. He hasn't been able to calm down everything in New York, which can be a very difficult thing to do when everything starts going downhill. So I think Daboll is in a really tough situation because he's coming off 2 disastrous seasons. He's coming off, the expectations of his first year, which he honestly had a brilliant season, and that kind of just ruined those next 2 years, and everyone has turned on him, into this year where he has a really difficult schedule and still no quarterback truly to count on until maybe Jackson Dart becomes that guy, if he does. But I think Daboll's probably going to get fired, which is unfortunate. I don't think he's a bad coach. I think actually he's a pretty good coach at times. I also think he'd be an above average offensive coordinator if he got that job again. I don't think, though, that he is some sort of like brilliant guy. I would not say that. I think that in Buffalo, he clearly had Josh Allen. That helps, okay? And as much as you want to give him credit for developing Josh Allen, I think Josh Allen always had those tools inside him. But for a lot of guys that are around Brian Daboll's level, it just kind of depends on the roster, the situation, and unfortunately, he's been put in a really poor, bad situation. So Daboll, I think his biggest enemy has just been the fact that he has not been able to kind of grasp or steer this culture in a consistent, positive direction. So that's why he's at number 24. At number 23, Jonathan Ganon of the Arizona Cardinals. Ganon is tough because I see the makings of a good coach and I see the potential, but it's really hard to rank him higher because he hasn't done really anything as a head coach at a high level. Like even defensively speaking, his defenses haven't ranked very well, but he's one of those guys that I feel like has definitely fielded a competitive defense, even if they haven't exactly performed competitively, if that makes sense. Because I think he has been so desperate for talent. So this is the year where Ganon will actually prove if he's a guy or not. Obviously, it didn't start off well with the pew, pew, pew. I mean, did not come across with the most aura or the most charisma, okay? But at the same time, I think he does have a little bit of an infectiousness in that locker room. I feel like last year was a pretty impressive effort from him just to get that team to 8-ish wins. I thought was pretty impressive with the inconsistencies from Kyler Murray throughout the season and just the lack of talent in various places across the roster. And I think that's the biggest thing I can say about Ganon is so far he's been able to prove that even with limited talent, he can make them competitive. And that's a start. But I want to see now what he can do with actual talent on his side of the ball, which is defense. They had a great offseason, so we'll see what he's able to do. So at number 23, Ganon, I wasn't the biggest fan of him as a Eagles defensive coordinator, but I have to say he's impressed me actually more, even though the results have been less in Arizona. So I have him at number 23. At number 22, I have Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen, the other former coordinator of the Eagles. I like him. And the one thing I'll say about Steichen is he has made the Colts, an 8-9 football team back-to-back seasons-ish. Maybe even 9-8 one of those years. I can't quite remember. But regardless, they have been a pretty mediocre to pretty good team despite not having a quarterback. And that's a really impressive thing to do in the NFL. And Steichen has showcased that he can put together an offense. He can steer together a running game for Jonathan Taylor. He's able to maximize some of these talents like Josh Downs, at times Michael Pittman. And I just feel like to be able to get that many wins and to be able to be basically a 500 coach with Gardner Minshew, right, with Anthony Richardson, with Joe Flacco, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Now, I don't think Steichen really has that much to his character. I don't really love his flavor, let's just say. He's not very charismatic. I don't see much there. But as a play caller, pretty good. And his results, just to be able to get that level of solid out of not a solid quarterback position, pretty good, right? So at number 22, Shane Steichen, kind of like Ganon, still need to see more. He might be a little bit like Daboll, where eventually he'll be let go because he never gets a quarterback. And that might be unfortunate. At number 21, Mike McDonald. McDonald went 10-7 in his first year, which is an improvement upon what Pete Carroll was doing with the Seahawks, despite not making the playoffs, by the way. Also, McDonald, I thought, showcased a couple different things as a young head coach. First of all, he showcased his defensive prowess and intelligence by taking a defense at the start of the year, which was kind of a disaster, making some tweaks and even personnel changes and bold moves, and turning it around throughout the season to get them to a top 10 level by the end of the year. That's extremely impressive. Second of all, he led the best defense in football with the Ravens the year before he got the job, which speaks to his intelligence as a defensive coach. He's very young, but I think he has a good combination of scheme prowess on his side of the ball, defense, and also good energy, okay? I don't think he's this incredibly over-the-top personality, but he's definitely got a good combination of youthful vibe, but also old school sort of mentality and just delivery, right? So I think Mike McDonald is going to be, for a while, one of the most promising and top-notch defensive minds in football, and that's going to keep him relevant. Now, we'll see if he can ever figure out that offensive side. Is Sam Darnold going to be the quarterback? Is Kubiak going to be the OC? That's always something he's going to have to figure out. And that's something that's going to determine whether or not he's a great head coach at the end of the day. Okay? But I think he's showcased enough to get this team to a level above where they were at, and then also at the same time showcase his defensive prowess by taking the defense from a kind of below average level to above average by the end of the season. So 21, Mike McDonald. At number 20, Todd Bulls of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now this one, for some Bucs fans, they might not like this. They might not swallow this well. But guys, Todd Bulls is somebody that I liked as a defensive coordinator. But as a head coach, I just don't love him. And maybe it's just one of these guys where I feel like it's one of those dilemmas where he's okay, but you could do so much better. That might be the problem with Todd Bulls, but you have to say, defensively overall, they've been pretty good since about 2021. I think, off the top of my head, they've been 8th in the NFL in EPA allowed when he was a defensive coordinator and when he was a head coach, okay? That's pretty good, all right? But it's slowly been declining. I think part of the problem with Bulls as a head coach is that his defense has actually taken strides backwards with him not being focused solely on defense. He's also really bad in late game situations, really poor in clock management situations, and he's just not an aggressive decision maker, like at all. And that oftentimes hurts his teams. I'd also say that he is not exactly the best speaker, not exactly the most vibrant, not exactly the most ideal candidate for being like over the top, infectious motivator. He's kind of a very calm, laid back personality. And maybe it helps to have a guy like Baker on offense to help stir the pot for this team. But I just don't know. Like, I think his defensive skills are sort of regressing or declining. And every other area of his acumen as a coach is just not above average. So that's kind of my problem with Todd Bulls is like, what is he really good at if defense is the thing that he's starting to decline at? Because that's the thing that got him the job. So at number 20, I have Todd Bulls. Obviously, he has the results where he's won this division numerous years in a row, but it's a really weak division, and he's had the best quarterback in that division every single year he's been there, and he's probably had the best roster as well. So at number 20, Todd Bulls. At number 19, Pete Carroll. The difference between Pete Carroll and Todd Bulls for me is despite Todd Bulls leading better defenses more recently, and despite Todd Bulls having more success recently than Pete Carroll has not won a playoff game in a while as a head coach. He also, since 2021, has a below 500 record. I think it's like 25-26 or something like that. So Pete Carroll is not the coach that he was in his prime. Let's say like 2012, 2013 with the Seahawks, okay? But Pete Carroll is still a very good motivator. He's still a very vibrant personality, despite his old age. And what I love about Pete Carroll is he's actually a good manager of the game, like 99% of the time. Some people would argue he should have handed the ball to Marshawn Lynch, but we can talk about that another day. That's not really managing the game. That's putting it on the offensive coordinator to call the right play. But Pete Carroll, I would say, does a good job of managing close games. And that's where the Seahawks found themselves many, many times under his tenure. That's the way he wanted to play. He has a style of game management. He has a style that he wants his team to play. And I think oftentimes he would also reinforce energy. A Pete Carroll team always plays with energy, passion, and fire, whether it be good or bad. So that's something I like about Pete. And I just like his attitude. Very infectious guy, very good speaker, even at his older age. So Pete Carroll, he has that Super Bowl. That was a long time ago, though, at this point. I'm not really kind of talking about that. I'm talking about the guy that he is now, right? That's who I'm talking about. We'll see if he still has it in 2025. At number 18, Mike McDaniel. McDaniel of the Miami Dolphins is probably a top 5, top 6 offensive mind in the NFL. But just the play calling is only one aspect of the coach. Mike McDaniel has had problems recently with his culture, has had problems with his team's toughness, and has had problems getting over the hump. Now, what I will say about McDaniel is that he has brought some new inventive thinking to offense in the NFL, even to a different degree than Kyle Shanahan. Like, that's his buddy, that's his friend. But when he separated from Kyle, you could clearly see the influence that he had over San Francisco and the influence that he has in Miami. I mean, he has been very inventive in his smoke and mirror offense in Miami, whether it be to maximize Tua and make him a good franchise level quarterback, or to do creative things with guys like Tyreek Hill, Jonnu Smith, Devon Achane. The speed approach of his entire thinking has been very fascinating and very fun to watch. I would also say that while he is a bit dorky and corny and cheesy, I think he does have a personality that can work. He's clearly himself, which I give him credit for being, even if it's a little weird for a head coach. He's more of like a ball boy or a water boy type vibe, but he's more of a mascot. But Mike McDaniel, it works for him, I guess, sort of. I would also say that he just has problems with like 3-phase approach, understanding what his team needs in all aspects, getting the coaching out of all aspects. He's just a little bit too offensive focused. And I think that's hurt his team in terms of their mentality later in the year. I think that's hurt them in terms of their physicality as a team. So at number 18, I have Mike McDaniel, extremely fun, offensive-minded coach. I think he would be a brilliant coordinator, but as a head coach, I just kind of think that he's mid because he has a lot of weaknesses that kind of almost hurt and help balance the clear strengths that he does have. I would also say that he's been a little unfortunate lately. A little bit unfortunate with some injuries, especially to his quarterback that he's been really needing. But hey, even Durkant said, a Miami Dolphin fan himself, that McDaniel does benefit from Tua because Tua is one of those guys that can actually function in the system that he sets out. At number 17, Zack Taylor of the Cincinnati Bengals. Taylor would be higher if this list were made 1 or 2 years ago, but it's not. That's the problem, okay? We just honestly came off of Zack Taylor's worst season as a coach, in my opinion. I thought that was his worst season. From the way that he approached the offseason to preparing his team early in the year, getting outcoached by Gerard Mayo was certainly a feat. Then, continuously having the lowly, terrible Septembers. And then on top of that, now it dives into this offseason where, yes, the Bengals front office is kind of like hurting him, but also like he couldn't get his defense under control. They just continuously lost games, whether due to his decision-making and clock management or just due to not having a three-phase football team. There was so much that a great coach would have been able to fix, would have been able to control. It felt like Zack Taylor was just out of control. There's a couple things he could have done, a couple games he could have won, a couple things he could have done differently to make that team 11-6, 12-5, and we would have been talking about the Bengals as a playoff team and a contender. Instead, Zack Taylor underwhelmed in all these aspects, and they were just 9-8. Despite the great season from Jamar Chase, despite the great season from Joe Burrow. Borderline historic for both of those individuals. Borderline the best player at their positions for portions of the season last year. So, yes, Taylor's been to 2 AFC championships. He's been to a Super Bowl. He had one really impressive campaign with Jake Browning and what he was able to lead that team to. But recently, it's been his worst effort. And it continues to reinforce that maybe he lacks that fortitude. He lacks that sternness. There's something about him that's a little soft. I think that Taylor needs to turn that corner and get this team to be a little bit more tougher instead of a bunch of drama queens, okay? So that's why I have him at number 17. At number 16, Kevin Stfansky. Stfansky and Taylor, I think, have similar weaknesses. I think they both lose control when things go poorly. But I think at their best, they've been pretty darn good coaches. Zack Taylor's had his success in the playoffs and has led some good teams, even with great quarterback play, while Stfansky has led great, brilliant coaching seasons to coaching of the year accolades, right, with different quarterbacks, different situations. He's been able to capture Cleveland and allow them to win a playoff game for the first time in forever. And also on top of that, he took Joe Flacco off the couch and made him a playoff quarterback in the year 2024. So I give him credit for that. At the same time, there's been in-betweens that have been very poor. His results lately are not good. They're bottom of the NFL territory. And without, honestly, a dominant performance in 2023 from that defense, I do kind of wonder where he'd be at now. But I just think the biggest thing is Stfansky kind of got overridden and destroyed and deteriorated by the Deshaun Watson situation, by his ownership that has honestly like way too much power and control over what he does. And I just kind of feel like Stfansky has never really truly been able to be him or like allow this team to live through his vision, because it's always been overridden by the ownership or by Deshaun Watson or by the idea from someone else of what this team should be. And that sucks for him. But at the same time, there's been a lack of consistency. And you have to blame him for not being able to steer the ship consistently. right? And be able to get this team on the right track when it's not going in the right direction. So very good coach. At the same time, though, I just think that more consistency would offer him to move up the list. At number 15, DeMeco Ryans. DeMeco Ryans the last 2 years has been proven as an NFL head coach. And the reason I say that is he went from 2022 in San Francisco, leading probably the best defense in the NFL that year, to then 2 years into his Texans career as a coach, leading the third best defense over the last 2 seasons. So over the last 2 seasons, the Texans have had collectively the third best defense in football. And remember where the Texans were before last year, before 2023, right? Like, they were not a good defense. They were a terrible team. They were a terrible team. They were probably the worst team in football, right? And yes, he lucked into CJ Stroud to a certain degree. And yes, they have added some talent. But DeMeco Ryans, his defensive coaching is kind of slipping under the radar as some of the best in the NFL. He's got that linebacker leadership that he obviously brings from his playing days. He's got that physical condition. You know, the way that he looks, the shape that he's in, I think that kind of brings that toughness out of his team. It brings that fiery energy out of his team. I think that's certainly something. When you watch the Texans, they play with their absolute butts on fire. They're running around making plays, and they play with passion, right? And I think DeMeco, you see that on the sidelines. You see that fire. You see that energy. You see that vibrance, okay? So I think he has a good collection of energy defensively, and then also that prowess schematically that I'm looking for in that type of coach. And he's had the proven track record of having back-to-back seasons of winning the division and winning a playoff game. That's difficult to do as a first-time head coach. So at number 15, DeMeco Ryans. At number 14, Mike Vrabel. Now, Vrabel would probably be higher on this list if he was a head coach last year, but he wasn't. So I have to keep that in mind. I think Mike Vrabel could get back to top 10, maybe even top 5 status if he has a really impressive Patriots season, which I think is very possible with the roster that they have constructed and with Drake May taking a step forward. Mike Vrabel, I think, most impressively gets a lot out of a little. In Tennessee, he was able to maximize that roster no matter the condition it was in. He took a Tennessee team in 2021 to the number 1 seed despite the most injuries we've ever seen in a season. That's ridiculous, right? He took that team a couple years before that to the AFC Championship despite nobody thinking they could beat the Patriots, that they could beat the Ravens, and then actually competitively play the Chiefs. So those are 2 incredibly impressive seasons from him. On top of that, he took another team to the playoffs, and he never really had a disastrous team. Despite the injuries to Ryan Tannehill, despite the lack of talent as it continued to drop off over the years, he still contained a team that was competitive, that was fighting, that was in it. That's difficult to do when you're starting Josh Dobbs in the last week of the year to make the playoffs, right? Like, that's tough. So Vrabel is, I'd say, a good mind for football, but more so as one of the better overseers as a head coach. He's a very good clock manager. I think he's one of the best in the NFL. And I think you're going to see that in New England. His ability to control a game through his usage of timeouts, challenges, his understanding of how to maximize every possession, the way his team needs to play in this game to beat this opponent, given how they play and their style. He's very savvy and smart in that regard. So Mike Vrabel is a guy that looks like a meathead, but he's actually a really smart guy. And that's a good collaboration and combination. He also has just a real toughness and aura of grit and just like absolute brutality of his aura. Like it's there. It's an old school blue collar is the right way to put it. Energy. So at number 14, Mike Vrabel. At number 13, Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn, I think, is the guy that's forgotten on this list for many people. Like, Dan Quinn had a brilliant year last year. And as much as I think Cliff Kingsbury was probably the best coordinator last season in terms of like the coordinator of the year, like I thought like honestly Cliff was phenomenal. But you still have to give Dan Quinn his credit for leading the team and taking a Commander franchise and a Commander culture and completely taking it in the different direction and pointing it forward. Like that has been the brilliance of Dan Quinn wherever he's been as a coach. Like he clearly learned that from Pete Carroll or something. Because Dan Quinn was able to do that in Atlanta. And not too long after, they were a great team. And he clearly has an eye for offensive talent. Because Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta and then Cliff Kingsbury in Washington. Not only that, people will give Jaden Daniels his credit, and I already have in my quarterback rankings. But Dan Quinn, I think this ranking is based on the fact that I've seen him now do it in 2 locations. I saw him bring a team to the Super Bowl in Atlanta. I saw him reshape and reculture and basically recraft the Commanders from the ground up. And despite having a good OC and a good young quarterback, he still had to do that as the guy in command. And he has that presence. He has that. And I thought he showcased balls, testicular fortitude throughout the late portions of the season in an underdog role, which is so important when you're evaluating coaches. Like they were an underdog against the Bucks. They were an underdog against the Lions. They were an underdog against the Eagles, and they got punished by the Eagles. But in those other games, they won outright. That's a big deal for a coach. Like that's a coach. That's a great coach, right? So yeah, you can give credit to Jaden Daniels. You can give credit to Cliff Kingsbury, Terry McLaurin, whoever you want to. And sure, the Commanders' defense didn't quite live up to the hype in terms of Dan Quinn's the defensive-minded guy. But you look at what he did in Dallas, you look at his ability to kind of recraft a culture, you look at his ability to recalibrate his defensive scheme from Seattle to Atlanta to Dallas to Washington, and he's just a smart guy. He knows how to be a step ahead. He knows how to bring a group of men together. I'm just extremely impressed by Dan Quinn, and I think I undersold him near the end of his tenure in Atlanta. At number 12, Jim Harbaugh. Now, Harbaugh is very similar to Quinn, and I think he's a little overrated by a lot of people. I think him and Dan Quinn are a lot more similar than people kind of discuss. They're both, at heart, culture coaches. Right? The most impressive thing that Jim Harbaugh did this year is the same most impressive thing Dan Quinn did. Both have brilliant quarterbacks, right? Jim Harbaugh took a Chargers team last year that, okay, they were bad, right? But they weren't as bad as their record because Herbert got hurt. And honestly, Brandon Staley was a disaster. So like Jim Harbaugh, I don't think the improvement of the Chargers is quite as impressive as some people think, just because the Chargers have always had talent. And they always had Justin Herbert. It's just that 1 year, it went way sideways and way wrong. But Harbaugh is a brilliant culture guy. Just the ability to go in somewhere and then completely change the perspective, completely change the mentality, completely get the most out of those guys in that building. And I think the belief from a Harbaugh team is second to none. The belief of what they need to do, the physicality, the toughness that he installs to every team he coaches, right? He's an offensive guy. He's a former quarterback, but he does not feel like it. That's the most impressive thing about Harbaugh. So at number 12, Jim Harbaugh. At number 11, KOC, Kevin O'Connell. I think the only reason I have him at 11 and not like 7 or 8 is just like the lack of playoff success, like the lack of resume, I guess. But O'Connell could have easily been the coach of the year multiple times in his career, in my opinion, already. He's a really impressive coach. I'm a big fan of Kevin O'Connell. And I'm trying to strip away like my favoritism for him in my ranking. Because I think in terms of like my favorite coaches, he's like near the top 5. But in terms of overall best, I put him at 11. I think one thing that the people that love Kevin O'Connell might discount is that he does have Brian Flores. And I think Brian Flores is a head coach in his own right. And honestly, like, I think Brian Flores is like a top 20. If he were a head coach, he'd be a top 20 coach in the NFL. But he's been blackballed from the NFL as a head coach. Just going to throw that out there. I would say, though, that he's a brilliant defensive coordinator. And that takes a lot of pressure off Kevin O'Connell to basically be the offensive head coach. So that's part of it, right? But I do think that O'Connell does have a really awesome combination of clever play calling skills and also really good communication skills. I don't think a lot of people don't really listen to the coaches or like watch the clips and stuff, but O'Connell's really impressive in front of his team and how he leads his team. I think also the fact that he's been able to get a lot out of Kirk Cousins and out of Sam Darnold, different quarterbacks, different seasons, even a little bit out of Josh Dobbs and, that one kind of weird season they had with the Cousins injury. Like, I think O'Connell has continued to show that his offense can operate with multiple quarterbacks and he can get a lot out of different guys. He's obviously a quarterback in his past, a former Patriot draft pick. I love him for that, but also I just think he's got that really good combination of leadership and scheme skills. And that's a great combination to have. And I think he's going to be good for a long time. Now we'll see what he does with J.J. McCarthy. It's another challenge for him. He's got to prove that he can develop a guy from scratch. I think another negative for him is not really a negative of him. It's just that he walked into a bit of a better situation than a lot of other guys walk into. I think when he walked into that situation, he had a steady quarterback. He had multiple, weapons to work with. He had plenty of talented players, right? So I don't think it was the most difficult situation to take over. Kind of like what I was talking about with Harbaugh. While there are other coaches that I think from the ground up had to kind of build their team, while O'Connell has been able to start his career off in a successful fashion with a good record because he already had talent, quarterback, all that sort of stuff already there. So at number 11, I have O'Connell. At number 10, entering the top 10, these are the best coaches in the NFL today. Dan Campbell, everyone's favorite coach of the Detroit Lions. Dan Campbell, I've not always been the biggest Dan Campbell guy. It took me a while, but I have to admit that I'm a believer in Dan Campbell because at the end of the day, Dan Campbell might not call plays, but Dan Campbell, he just understands what sports are about at the core. And sports at the core is about a team that plays with heart, a team that plays with passion, a team that plays with relentlessness, right? The willingness to win for their teammate beside them. And Dan Campbell probably does this better than anyone in the NFL. He is the emotional master. He just gets so much fire and passion out of his team. He's a great motivator. And not only that, I think he just has this relationship with all of his players that is very unique. And I mean, the guy is just 100% himself. He's willing to cry in front of the media. It might be a little over the top and people might not like it, but it's just so uniquely him. So I give him points for that. I also give him points for being able to totally change the culture of the Lions and the way that we look at Detroit football. Before Dan Campbell, it was the Matt Patricia era. It was a new low for the Lions. And he totally, it took him some time, but he was able to go steadily, and build that culture up. And the Bite the Kneecaps team started to take over the NFL. And people started to fall in love with it. So, sure, has he had great coaches around him like Ben Johnson calling the plays? Has he had great talent given to him? Of course. But Dan Campbell, I just think he has this ability to craft his culture, this ability to emotionally be in check and in tune with his team that I just don't think a lot of coaches possibly can or will or do. So at number 10, Dan Campbell. At number 9, Mike Tomlin. Now, before Dan Campbell, there was Mike Tomlin. They're a little bit different, but Mike Tomlin is a culture builder at heart. Mike Tomlin is the ultimate coach in terms of destroying distraction, right? When we talk about Mike Tomlin, his ultimate skill is being able to overcome all distraction, overcome personality, and be able to get Pittsburgh in the right direction. This guy has never had a losing season for a reason, because he minimizes negatives on the field and off the field. That's the most impressive part about Mike Tomlin. He also has great command over his team. I think he's a very good leader in terms of his communication skills. And clearly they play with the same sort of passion and Pittsburgh physicality that the teams in the previous eras played with, right? The problem with Tomlin is that I think he's clearly been out-clevered, out-coached, out-schemed in big moments throughout recent history, but pretty much his entire career, right? He had 1 year in 2008 where they won the Super Bowl, but other than that, his playoff resume has been pretty underwhelming, and recently he has not won a playoff game since 2016. I bring up this stat numerous times, but I think it shows the ceiling of Mike Tomlin. It shows that he is the ultimate floor raiser, but his ceiling is limited because defensively speaking, he's a good but not great coach. And clearly he's not an offensive guy. So he's relying on quarterback play. He's relying on offensive scheme around him, coordinators that may or may not be good. And honestly, he hasn't been good at picking coordinators. And they have not had Ben Roethlisberger for quite some time. So you give him the credit for being the culture builder and the consistency master, but you cannot give him a elite categorization because he gets out-coached by elite schemers. So at number 9, Mike Tomlin. At number 8, Sean McDermott. You know, I've been very critical of Sean McDermott throughout my time on the Bottom Line View because I want to see the Bills win. I'm a Patriots fan, but I want to see the Bills win one Super Bowl. I love Josh Allen. I love that team. I love watching them play. And I feel like this guy has let them down in some big moments, Sean McDermott. But let's be fair and let's look ourselves in the mirror and let's ask ourselves, how many guys have been more successful and more consistent than Sean McDermott in the NFL? And honestly, like, other than Andy Reid, who outcoaches Sean McDermott on a consistent basis? I don't think you could name one, right? He loses to Andy Reid. Congratulations. A lot of guys lose to Andy Reid. A lot of guys lose to Patrick Mahomes. A lot of guys and a lot of teams have lost to the Chiefs. I know that they're the team that everyone thinks of, but a lot of people do. So for me to continue to punish that for that one thing, I think is unfair. Especially when you consider, do you know which defense is number 1 in EPA since 2021? The Buffalo Bills. So Sean McDermott, for all his failures with his defense in the playoffs, he crafts a brilliant defense year in and year out, no matter the personnel. He's a good defensive coach. He's a good defensive coach. He also showed that before Josh Allen, he could take a team that was defensive driven with a mediocre quarterback and get them to the playoffs. He did that with Tyrod Taylor, right? And then also with a younger Josh Allen who was still kind of raw, he took them to a good season. And then with the great Josh Allen, they have been consistently a threat to get to the Super Bowl. They just haven't done it yet. So there's a little bit of that choking. But at the same time, it's hard to say that there's been a lot of guys more successful, more consistent, and better on their side of the ball than Sean McDermott. And I think he also does a great job of leading his team and getting through controversy and getting through some low moments or like being able to bounce back. I think he's shown that as well. So at number 8, Sean McDermott. At number 7, Matt LaFleur. I have Matthew LaFleur here at number 7. The best haircut in the game, but Matt LaFleur is my number 7. I think he's one of the best play callers in football. I think he's one of the best offensive minds in football. I think what Matt LaFleur has proven is that he can coach multiple quarterbacks to success. And he's also been able to prove that he is one of the better run game coordinators in the NFL and that he has a really crafty scheme. I think he's also been one of the best consistent winners in the sport. I don't think he's had a season yet where he's had less than 8 wins. And he has one of the best win percentages we've ever seen for a young coach. So he hasn't been overwhelming in his playoff resume, although he's been to multiple championship games. Not since 2021, though. In 2019 and 2020, he went to NFC championships, right? Recently, he hasn't had that playoff success. But I think part of what hurts and holds back Matt LaFleur is the reluctance from the front office to really support him with a super talented roster. I think he's been given a lot of youthful offensive talent that he's had to groom and grow with and develop. And he's done a great job doing that, especially with Jordan Love. But he hasn't really been given the over-the-top necessary pieces to overcome the more talented teams in the NFC. So I think Matt LaFleur has showcased the scheme. I think he showcased consistency. I think he showcased adaptability. And I think he showcased a pretty consistent presence and confidence. I think Matt LaFleur is a very good coach. So at number 7, I have LaFleur. At number 6, John Harbaugh. Now, John Harbaugh, I was critical of him in my PFF reaction. I've always respected John Harbaugh. And I was just trying to be critical from a new perspective because I don't think that a lot of people talk about Harbaugh in a negative way because like, he is great. But honestly, like, he's been a little underwhelming in recent years in big moments. But again, guys, there's only one guy a year that wins a Super Bowl, and frequently it's been Andy Reid recently. So there's a lot of guys that have been underwhelming in that department recently, right? But Harbaugh does deserve some blame for the lack of not getting Baltimore another championship. He has that one championship with the great Joe Flacco, January Joe run, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed in 2012. And he ran into, some good Patriots teams over the years, and he went to, multiple championship games. But like recently with Lamar Jackson as his quarterback, they should have a Super Bowl. They should be in a Super Bowl. They were a number 1 seed multiple times. He's underwhelmed in that department. But what impresses me about Harbaugh, consistency is one. I think he has shown, even without Lamar, that they've been able to play a style and win some games in certain seasons. It hasn't always been pretty, but they've been able to do that. His ability to pick coordinators is extremely impressive. His ability to pick offensive, defensive coordinators and always be able to understand where his team's at, what needs to evolve, what needs to get better, what needs to ramp up, how to turn the knobs. He's brilliant at that. I think he's a great, just understanding of what other great coaches and how they can help him and how they can get to the next stage. I think he's also very good at his team being able to play with the necessary physicality, the necessary toughness, and the necessary skill. It's rare for a coach to find both rhythms. I'd also say that defensively, they've been very consistent. Special teams, they've been very consistent. Special teams has, that's his kind of his core insight. But I would say that Harbaugh, he just needs to be a bit better in those big moments. Otherwise, he does a lot of the little things extremely well, and he does a lot of the overseer elements at an elite level. So at number 6, I have Harbaugh. Entering the top 5. People might not like it. People may love it. People may hate him. People may love him. But I have Nick Sirianni at number 5. That's right. I have not been a Nick Sirianni fan, and truthfully, I am not a Nick Sirianni fan. But one thing I can say is that whether you love him or hate him, he has results. He has results. Whether you think he does absolutely nothing or he does absolutely everything, he has results. He's been to 2 Super Bowls in 4 years. He's won a Super Bowl. In that Super Bowl, he was extremely impressive from his perspective. And I know Vic Fangio is probably the best coach in that game, but Sirianni was the head coach. He's responsible. Nick Sirianni is partly responsible for the disaster of 2023, but also the recalibration of 2024. I think Nick Sirianni, if you want to say that Mike Tomlin is a top 10 coach, that Harbaugh is a top 10 coach, that these guys that are more so overseers, Jim Harbaugh even, Dan Quinn, right? Nick Sirianni is that same type of coach. He just has more results. So yeah, we might not really know what his art is. But what I think it is I think that he is the absolute, if you were to categorize what a Philadelphia personality should be as a head coach of a city, it's Nick Sirianni. He is a bit of a D-bag, but that's exactly what that city needs. It's exactly what it needs, right? I think he's the best categorization of a city and a team of any coach. That is his art. That is what it is, okay? I think that gets the most out of his team. I think he is an instigator. That's what he is, okay? So at number 5, I have Nick Sirianni. You may not love him. You may hate him. But if you want to put Mike Tomlin up here, If you want to put John Harbaugh up here, what's the difference? Nick Sirianni, number 5. At number 4, Sean Payton of the Denver Broncos. Sean Payton, in my opinion, is a Hall of Fame coach. I think one day he will be in the Hall of Fame. He's a former Super Bowl winner. Now, based on the last few years, his accolades, his resume would not suggest a top 4 finish. But a lot of coaching is contextual, right? A lot of these lists could be a lot different. My list could be a lot different depending on the context and the way that you weigh certain context. But coaching is about context. And with Sean Payton, he was able to still drive a competitive Saints team post a Hall of Fame retirement from Drew Brees. You can't say that about Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. 1 season out of like 4, okay? You can't say that. And yes, he did quit on his team and he did leave. But what did he do when he came back? He took a disastrous Broncos team and made them competitive. I think he elevated them by about 4 or 5 wins. Then the year after, he took a team that nobody thought would be good and got them to the playoffs. A rookie quarterback to the playoffs. The 5th or 6th one picked in that draft. So Sean Payton has been a brilliant play caller, and he's been able to revolutionize and kind of evolve time and time again what he does offensively. And I think we're seeing that right now in person in Denver. On top of that, he is the rare offensive coach that still has a fundamentally sound and physical football team. All the best ones do. Sean Payton has found that. And Sean Payton has that arrogance and that instigatorness that I talked about with Nick Sirianni, right? Payton, I think, could have been the coach of the year last year. It was that impressive of an effort, right? So at number 4, Sean Payton. At number 3, Sean McVay. I was going to put him at number 2, but through my calculations and my statistic findings, let's say, the stats that I was really able to find on McVay and my number 2, I slightly lean back to my number 2. But at number 3, Sean McVay. McVay is brilliant. Everything about McVay, he's create a coach, right? He's a great communicator. He's got incredible energy. He remembers literally everything. He's a great personality in terms of getting his team going, getting his team fired up. All the decisions that he makes off the field, he's a tone setter. He's a trend setter in terms of, oh, we don't play in the preseason. Now nobody plays in the preseason. Things like that, right? On top of that, he has been at the forefront of offensive evolution. I do think in recent years that has taken a dip. I will say that. I don't think he's quite the coach or play caller he was on that side of the ball that he was a few years ago. But I think that in terms of a collection of talents and skills, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to motivation, when it comes to communication, when it comes to play calling, when it comes to off the field decisions, when it comes to roster building, development of players, Sean McVay has proven he can take older teams to success, younger teams to success. He can take defensive teams, offensive teams. He can take Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford. I will say, though, he's had 2 first overall picks as his quarterbacks, and they've been to 2 Super Bowls. Now, since 2021, his record is kind of like pedestrian. It's pretty good, but not amazing. You know, they won that Super Bowl in 2021, and ever since, they only have 1 playoff win. So, 1 playoff win in 3 years. So, it hasn't been great recently, but this has been a recalibration and a rebuilding of the Rams, and that's why I have him at number 3, because now he's gone through a different tenure of his career, a different part of his career, where he's been able to prove that he can still be that team builder that he was at the beginning, instead of just the guy that's riding the stacked, loaded rosters, right? So at number 3, Sean McVay. At number 2, Kyle Shanahan. Funny enough, Kyle Shanahan is now going through that development that Sean McVay just did. And it's funny because Sean McVay got the job in LA, I think a year. It might have been the same time or maybe a year after. I can't quite remember. But they got the jobs around the same time. So it's funny how that works. But Kyle Shanahan has been the second most successful coach on average in the NFL since 2019, 2020. Okay. And using the 2021 statistics, he has the second most playoff wins. He has 3 conference championship appearances, which is the second most. He actually has the team that has the best yard differential in the NFL since 2021. He also leads and calls plays for the 3rd best offense in the NFL since 2021, right? On average, they're the 3rd best offense. And that is only below Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. So when you consider what Kyle Shanahan's been able to do, we just talked about Sean McVay. He had Matthew Stafford, a Georgia legend, a first overall pick, a borderline like Hall of Very Good before he even got to the Rams, right? That helped them win a Super Bowl. Jared Goff has gone on to become a top 10 quarterback on a different team in a different location in a different scheme with a different group of players in Detroit. So 2 first overall picks for Sean McVay. Kyle Shanahan has gotten Jimmy Garoppolo, who has not played well anywhere but San Francisco, for a brief period of time to a Super Bowl, and Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, to a Super Bowl. In 2023, he coached 3 different quarterbacks to an NFC Championship appearance. 3 different quarterbacks. And he still didn't win Coach of the Year. So there is some bias and some hate towards Kyle Shanahan that I don't think people talk about because he's the son of Mike Shanahan, because his dad is great and people look at him as daddy's boy. But Kyle has proven to be one of the most brilliant football minds of this generation, right? There's a reason he was the offensive coordinator on ESPN's team of the last 25 years, and it wasn't Sean McVay, right? There's a reason for that. Like, Kyle is the guy that has driven offensive football. He's also, I think, been able to prove more than pretty much anybody that he can take a pedestrian quarterback and make them very good, whether by development or by just like the scheme alone. He's also a great run game coordinator. He's also, I think, really grown in terms of leadership and player personality engagement. And I think he's really, really good. Really just had a tough time with finding replacement for D'Amico Ryans, but now Robert Saleh is back. But overall, he did a great job of finding new head coaches for other teams. That's been like across the board. Mike McDaniel, Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans, etc. You go down the list. There's been numerous coordinators that have been stripped from his team, and he still remains successful. So I mean, people always say he has the loaded roster and stuff, but I think a lot of that is actually driven by what Kyle does with the scheme to make that roster as good as it is. I don't necessarily think it's the individual players. There are some great individual players there, but I actually think it's the coaching, which is basically like the number one thing of being a great coach, is you make good players appear like they're Hall of Famers. So at number 2, Kyle Shanahan. I thought I was going to put him at 3, but I actually did end up putting him at number 2. And then at number 1, Andy Reid. Obviously, Andy Reid, he's still the best in the game. He did lose the Super Bowl this year, and he's had a couple embarrassing Super Bowl efforts on his resume, and that might hold him back from being literally the greatest coach of all time. That might be the difference between him and Bill Belichick or whoever else you put on that list. But Andy Reid, like obviously is the best coach in the NFL, right? He's one of the best play callers. He's one of the best culture builders. He's one of the best player personality managers in the NFL. I think that's one of the kind of elements of his coaching that goes kind of not noticed. People don't talk about Andy Reid, but how many criminals do the Chiefs have? And they don't seem to really have a problem. I mean, I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm just going to just subtly, and then even a Taylor Swift distraction, like that hasn't really hurt them at all. It's only made them better. And like things like that, right? Like a lot of teams would actually be driven to negative with those distractions. But Andy Reid never has those distractions affect his team. And he's always been able to evolve his offense, always been able to change with the times, always been able to get the most out of the team that he has, the roster that he has, always been able to find the correct changes and tweaks to that personnel or to the scheme or whatever it may be. And obviously he's been the most dominant coach in recent years. So nothing else really has to be said. Basically, he was already one of the greatest coaches we've ever seen. Then he got Patrick Mahomes, and he became literally like top 3, top 5 of all time. So at number 1, Andy Reid. Nothing else has to be said. There it is, guys. My NFL head coach rankings of 2025. I hope you enjoyed this list. If you did, Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to not be a jabroni and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace, guys.